Hello and welcome to Unacademy IAS English, a one-stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. In the world of international relations, generally between two friendly countries, there is an unspoken understanding that they will respect each other's core interests, that they will not step on each other's toes and they will not cross each other's red lines. But yesterday, Iran, which usually is a strategic close partner to India, has crossed that red line by commenting on India's internal matters. Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, has made a controversial statement on the plight of Indian Muslims. And it appears to indicate that the Indian government is responsible for the violation of minority rights in the country. So this controversial statement by Iran's supreme leader on India's internal matters has obviously evoked a strong response from India. So the Ayatollah tweeted that enemies of Islam are trying to divide Muslims around the world on the lines of sectarian divide between the Shias and Sunnis. And he pointed to the plight of Muslims around the world in conflict zones such as Myanmar, Gaza, and equated that situation with that of India. Now, this is where India finds this statement by Iran's supreme leader to be totally unacceptable. If you look at Myanmar and the plight of the Rohingya Muslims, where they have been persecuted by Myanmar's army and the radical Buddhists, it is one of the disastrous humanitarian situations that we have dealt with in recent times. If you look at the Gaza conflict, the suffering of Palestinians, it's another humanitarian tragedy in the making. But to compare and equate these situations with the plight of Indian Muslims, allegedly being persecuted and targeted by the government and the religious majority, is a completely out of line statement, and it shows that Iran has a very limited understanding of the situation in India. Or Iran derives certain benefits maybe by making such statements. So naturally, there has been a very strong response from New Delhi. India's Ministry of External Affairs has criticized the statement. India has called it a deplorable statement by the Supreme Leader, and India has pointed out that Iran is misinformed about the situation of Muslims in India. India remains a constitutional secular republic with guaranteed fundamental rights to all citizens, including religious minorities. Of course, there have been allegations of increasing religious hatred and targeting of minorities of late, but it is not for an external country to meddle and interfere and to make such comments, that too with a friendly partner like India. So India's MEA has strongly criticized these comments, rejected the statement of Iran's supreme leader, and India has asked Iran to look at its own internal issues and its own track record before making such comments on India. So this strong statement by India clearly points out the importance of this issue. So in this context, we should understand why Iran made this statement. Is there a past? Is there a history to this? Has Iran taken such controversial positions regarding India's internal matters in the past? What is the nature of India-Iran relations in general? Has India done something to instigate Iran as well? And we need to take a broader look at India-Iran relations. I told you that we have a strategic partnership, we have been close friends. At the same time, we have a complex history and we deal with some complex circumstances in today's geopolitics. So let's examine all these topics in detail. But before that, we have a very important announcement. The new batches for 2025 aspirants has just started on the Unacademy platform. The classes are available in English under the Liberty batch and as well as in Hindi and bilingual medium. And you get to be taught by India's top educators. So if you wish to enroll for the program, you stand to attend live classes by our top educators, along with accessing the prelims and mains test series, one-on-one mentorship, and also doubt resolution sessions. So if you wish to enroll for the English online classroom program, you can subscribe to the program for a 12-month subscription at just $29,999. So if you wish to enroll for the classes, the link is provided in the video description, or you can contact us at the number provided on the screen. Now, before I start the discussion, I urge you to support us with your likes and comments. because that is what keeps us going. So for every view, can we expect one like and one comment? One view, one like, one comment, so that it motivates us to do better, and more importantly, it will promote the reach of these videos, these free initiatives, which can help lakhs of students and aspirants around the country who may not be able to afford the paid classes. So based on the introduction we have had, let's discuss this topic in great detail. Let's understand the brief history of India-Iran relations. See, after India became independent, initially we had a slightly complex relationship with Iran, because by late 1940s, early 1950s, the world was divided by Cold War geopolitics. Post Second World War, we saw the emergence of Cold War rivalries between the Western Bloc, led by United States and its democratic capitalist allies. And on the other side, we had the Eastern Bloc, represented by the communist, socialist countries, led by the Soviet Union. So this rivalry between the two superpower blocs divided the world order. Most countries chose sides, and some of them remained neutral and non-aligned, like India. So when India was championing the non-aligned movement, and when India refused to side either with the Soviet bloc or the American bloc, Iran, on the other hand, had become a close American ally, especially in early 1950s. The then Iranian elected government was toppled in a regime change operation, a covert intelligence-led operation conducted by United States and United Kingdom, as they were trying to control Iranian policies, especially related to the oil economy of Iran. See, during the World War, Iran was a monarchy ruled by the Pahlavi dynasty. So the Shah of Iran had stepped down by early 1950s. Following elections in Iran, a nationalist government had been elected, and this Iranian regime nationalized the oil resources of Iran, which would hurt Western interests, American and British interests. This pushed the Western countries during the Cold War era to launch a covert operation aimed at regime change. The CIA and the Secret Intelligence Service, the MI6 of UK, would actively support a regime change operation to bring back the monarchy, to bring the Shah of Iran back into power. So by early 1950s, US and UK succeeded in this regime change operation. They toppled the Iranian government in a coup, and Mohammad Reza Pahlavi of the Shah dynasty would succeed, and Iran would continue as a monarchy. And the Shah would become autocratic during this period and align Iran firmly with United States. Some of you might find it hard to believe that today Iran, when you look at Iran, you see Iran as a conservative, radical Shia power. But prior to 1979, when Iran was an American ally under the Shah's regime, Iran was actually slightly more progressive, more liberal, as it was deeply influenced by Western cultural influence. So Iran ended up becoming an American ally. Again, you might find it hard to believe, because today Iran and US are arch rivals, arch enemies. Iran calls for death to America. United States targets Iran day in, day out. But there was a time when Iran, US had become allies following this regime change that was engineered by United States. So as Iran became an American ally, at least till 1971, India could never get very close to Iran, because India was championing the third neutral path, the non-aligned path during the Cold War. Then in 1971, when United States became hostile to India during the liberation of Bangladesh war and threatened India, India abandoned non-alignment and we sided with the Soviet bloc. Then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi signed the historic Treaty of Peace and Friendship, thus aligning India strategically and in the military domain with the Soviet Union and relying on Soviet support to liberate Bangladesh. So as India aligned with the communist bloc and Iran remained under American influence, we were on the opposite sides of the Cold War until 1979. So throughout this period of 20 plus years, India and Iran weren't very close to each other. But then came the Iranian Revolution of 1979. The Shah's regime was becoming increasingly popular because of his autocratic policies. And also, the Shah was accused of being an American puppet, which was resisted by Iranian nationalists and as well as by the radical Shia clerics. So thus began the Iranian Revolution, led by the people of Iran, the nationalists, and as well as by the radical Shia clerics. Eventually, this revolution was hijacked by the conservative radical elements, and the Iranian Revolution succeeded in toppling the Shah's regime. The Shah eventually fled, ran away from the country, and following the successful revolution, the radical Shia clerics captured power and established Iran as a conservative theocracy. Iran would turn into a Shia power, adopting conservative religious-based ideology and enforcing the strict Sharia, which would even lead to violation of human rights and especially gender rights. Since then, Iran became quite notorious as a conservative state, as a radical state, and it would even involve in many covert wars across the region that would destabilize West Asia. The sectarian divide in Islam would reflect in the sectarian geopolitics of West Asia, where Shia powers and Sunni powers got divided. As Iran rose as a Shia power and aligned with other Shia countries like Syria, Iraq and others, Lebanon, etc., the Sunni powers aligned together under Saudi Arabia, leading to intense rivalries between them. The radical Shia regime would express complete support to the Palestinian movement, including the extremist movement, and it would call for death to Israel and death to America. Iran declared open rivalry with Israel and United States, and naturally the Sunni powers led by Saudi Arabia aligned with US and even Israel, because now they had a common enemy in the form of a Shia Iran. So this is how the West Asia region got divided, and India did have an opportunity to slightly build relations with this new regime, and we did make an attempt to strengthen the relations. But this would not last long, because in the 1980s, again Iran and India were on the opposite sides, especially with regard to regional geopolitics. Iran was trying to woo Pakistan, as Iran wanted to keep Pakistan away from Saudi influence, because Saudi and Pakistan were natural allies as Sunni powers, both were aligned together. So Iran, being a neighbor of Pakistan, wanted to wean Pakistan away from Saudi influence, and it started backing Pakistan on critical issues. This is where Iran created problems for India in the 80s as well, by supporting Pakistan on the Kashmir issue and accusing India of committing human rights violations in Kashmir. This pushed India to support Iraq during the Iran-Iraq War of 1980s. As India was very close to Iraq, Iraq was a major oil supplier to India. We were very close to Saddam Hussein as well. India aligned with Iraq as Iran backed Pakistan, and it raised the issue of Kashmir and pointed towards India, accused India of committing human rights violations. So this was again a difficult period in the relationship, and India-Iran were not very close to each other. But finally, the opportunity came up for both countries to collaborate together, to work together in the 1990s in Afghanistan. In 1996, Afghanistan had come under the control of the Taliban, a Sunni radical outfit. Naturally, a Shia Iran saw the Taliban as a threat. India, of course, had already seen Taliban as a threat, as it was a proxy of Pakistan, as it was sheltering anti-India terrorist groups. Similarly, Russia would also see the Taliban as a threat, as the Soviet Union had been primarily defeated by the Afghan Mujahideen, which was the parent entity of the Taliban. The Taliban was essentially a byproduct of the Afghan Mujahideen, which had been supported by Pakistan and United States during the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan in the 80s. So this led India to align with Russia and interestingly with Iran to counter the Taliban by supporting the Northern Alliance. Northern Alliance was a coalition of northern tribes in Afghanistan, primarily dominated by the Tajik community. So the intelligence agencies of India, Iran and Russia would covertly work together and extend covert support to the Northern Alliance to counter the Pashtun-dominated Taliban. So this covert involvement of India, Iran and Russia to counter Taliban and Pakistan's influence in the region brought us together and helped us build a strategic security-based partnership. We even went on to sign military agreements and defense pacts. Our intelligence agencies would start working together, as both India and Iran were concerned about terrorism that emanated from the Afghanistan-Pakistan belt. So counter-terrorism became a focus in the 1990s, and at least in this sector, we were working together. By early 2000, India-Iran built up a strong economic and strategic partnership. Iran is blessed with hydrocarbon reserves, and India became one of the biggest buyers of Iranian oil and gas. There was a point where Iran would become the second biggest supplier of oil to India. India would invest in the gas fields of Iran. The ONGC or ONGC Videsh Limited, OVL, would invest in the Farzad B gas field, which is a major well-known gas reserve of Iran located near the Hormuz Strait in the Persian Gulf. We even conceptualized a gas pipeline called IPI project that would link Iran with Pakistan and India, an undersea pipeline in the Arabian Sea that could bring gas to India. So Iran became a key energy supplier to India, guaranteeing our energy security, diversifying our energy supplies. We built a strategic partnership focused on counter-terrorism, security and defense cooperation. And more importantly, India pursued few strategic projects with Iran in the early 2000 and mid 2005. The then Manmohan Singh government, the previous Vajpayee government, gave utmost priority to Iran because Iran could be the gateway for us to access Afghanistan and, more importantly, Central Asia. By 2001, the Taliban regime had been thrown out in Afghanistan following the American invasion after the 9/11 attacks. A civilian government had been installed in Afghanistan, and immediately India built very close ties with the Afghan government. Now, we wanted connectivity with Afghanistan so that we could access the resources of Afghanistan and further extend the connectivity into Central Asia, where all the Central Asian countries were willing to work with India to allow India to access the resources of Central Asia. But what we lacked was connectivity, because Pakistan would never give us transit access to reach Afghanistan. And even though on the official map, you can see a India-Afghan border near the Wakhan corridor, this border doesn't exist in reality, as Pakistan has occupied this part of Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. This is Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. So since 1947, India hasn't had direct connection with Wakhan corridor, which would have connected us with Afghanistan and further with Central Asia. And as I said, we could never depend on Pakistan for transit access. So India's strategy was to bypass Pakistan by working with Iran over a strategic project, the Chabahar port project near the Hormuz Strait. India would invest heavily in building and operating the Chabahar port, and we would even plan a road and railway link to connect with the Afghan border, where India had built a highway connecting Zaranj and Delaram, which would extend to Kabul and Central Asia, thus creating a trade corridor. In fact, in 2017, India, Iran, Afghanistan even signed a trilateral agreement to operationalize this trade corridor. Even now, an Indian company operates the Shahid Beheshti terminal at Chabahar, and recently, just few months ago, India-Iran signed an agreement to provide for long-term contract to the Indian company to operate the Shahid Beheshti terminal at Chabahar port. So we have been involved in such strategic connectivity projects. We are also part of the proposed INSTC corridor, International North-South Transport Corridor, that could bring India closer to Russia and even Eurasia, Central Asia region, and Iran is a key component in this proposed project. The idea is to link India with Iran through the sea route, through Arabian Sea, to connect with Bandar Abbas and Chabahar port, and use Iranian connectivity routes to connect with the Caspian Sea by working with Azerbaijan, and further extend this route into Russia, maybe Eastern Europe, Eurasia, and even Central Asia. So this is a grand ambitious project which India, Russia have been working on in collaboration with Iran. But however, India-Iran relations have taken a hit as well, especially because of India-US relations and the tensions between US-Iran. India was essentially forced to take certain decisions that went against Iranian interests. And recently, when Iran felt upset with India's decisions, it even dropped India from the Chabahar railway project, which was supposed to be jointly executed by us. India was eyeing the Chabahar railway line to connect the strategic Chabahar port with Zaranj and Hajigak, so that we could access the iron ore mines in Hajigak and transport the iron ore from Afghanistan through this road and rail corridor to link with Chabahar port. Iran dropped India from this key project, and India-Iran relations have seen a lot of friction in the recent years. So it is indeed a complicated relationship, and primarily Iran-US tensions, Iran-Israel rivalry has been a determining factor in the relationship. So to understand why Iran often crosses India's red lines, why does it support Pakistan on Kashmir, or why does it make statements about India's internal issues about the Muslim community in India, we need to look at all these aspects. If you look at the rivalry between Iran, US and Iran and Israel, it primarily stems from Iran's intense rivalry against these countries. Right from 1979, after becoming a Shia conservative power, Iran declared death to Israel, to wipe out Israel from the map, and extended complete support to the Palestinian movement, including extremist groups like Hamas, Palestinian Liberation Organization, Islamic Jihad and the others. It continues to back extremist forces like the Hezbollah, the Houthis, which target Israeli American interests even today with regard to the ongoing Gaza conflict. But what really triggered US and Israel was Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons from the late 90s and early 2000s. Iran sought a deterrence against US and Israel and the Sunni powers, and it started out a nuclear weapons program, which was a breach of non-proliferation treaty. So since then, US, Israel, along with the Sunni powers have targeted Iran and its nuclear program. US in particular imposed crippling economic sanctions to punish the Iranian economy. Israel and US together even conducted several covert operations to target Iranian nuclear scientists and top generals. Several top officials of Iran have been assassinated in these targeted killings, and US and Israel also allegedly have conducted cyber warfare by using computer worms like Stuxnet to destroy the nuclear centrifuges of Iran. So during this period of intense rivalry from 2008 all the way till 2014, when the tensions were at its peak, it was a very difficult situation for India, because parallelly we had very good relations with US, Israel, and we were looking to build good ties with Saudi and other Sunni powers as well. So striking a balance between these conflicting powers would pose an incredible challenge for India during this period. When the United States had imposed economic sanctions targeting the oil and defense sector of Iran, the US pressurized India to cut off oil trade, but the then Manmohan Singh government refused, as India follows an independent foreign policy. India cited the principle of strategic autonomy, which allows India to maintain an independent foreign policy, and India said we have never followed unilateral sanctions imposed by one country or few countries against a select country. We only follow UN sanctions, and India rejected the American sanctions, and we bypassed the American sanctions on Iran during this period. We worked out alternate payment routes, we used alternate currencies. Eventually, we used the Indian rupee to pay for the Iranian oil, and thus we sustained the strategic relations with Iran. So Iran was thankful to India for all the support during this period, and we became even more close with regard to our strategic and security cooperation, be it the Chabahar project or counter-terrorism. Iran became a reliable partner during this period. It kept supplying oil and gas to India as India bypassed the American sanctions and supported Iran. But then it appeared as if US and Iran were headed towards a war by 2014. So this situation was diffused by the other global powers by negotiating the Iran nuclear deal, also called the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, in 2015. So this led to the reduction in tensions as Iran agreed to shut down its pursuit of nuclear weapons, and it agreed to surrender the weapons grade uranium to European countries, which were also part of the deal. The deal was worked out by P5+1 countries and European Union with Iran. P5 is nothing but the 5 permanent members of UN Security Council. +1 here refers to Germany and European Union. So these powers negotiated with Iran, worked out the deal, and in return US agreed to lift the sanctions, and normal relations resumed between the Western powers and Iran. This was great news for India. India could easily continue the trade without the fear of American pressure or without the need to balance Iran and United States. So things were looking very good between India and Iran, but it was again disrupted by Donald Trump's erratic policies, which started out from 2018. When Donald Trump was the US president in 2018, US alleged that Iran was violating the Iran nuclear deal, that it was still secretly building a nuclear bomb in violation of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Based on these allegations, Trump quit the Iran nuclear deal. The US withdrew from the JCPOA and it imposed very stringent sanctions again on Iran. And this time, the Trump government brought tremendous pressure on every country to follow the sanctions. And the Modi government unfortunately fell under American pressure and we were forced to zero out oil imports, cut off oil imports completely from Iran. So at one point, Iran being a second top oil supplier to almost zero oil imports, we had completely scaled down India-Iran relations, especially our oil trade. And to be fair to the Modi government, practically it would have been untenable for Indian companies to work with Iran and continue the trade, because even the Indian companies would have been hit by the American sanctions. So practical reasons also dictated that we cut off the oil imports and look out for other suppliers. So as India zeroed out oil imports, obviously Iran was fuming. Iran was angry at India. Within few months, it dropped India from the Chabahar railway project. It gave greater space for China under the Belt and Road Initiative, and Chinese investments have gone up significantly while India has been largely excluded from the Chabahar railway project. The only positive is that India-Iran still have managed to balance the relationship despite all the complexities, and we still have control over the Chabahar port. The Shahid Beheshti terminal is still operated by an Indian company. As I told you recently, few months ago, we have signed a long-term deal that allows India to have control over the Chabahar port. But however, during this entire period of complex relationship of ups and downs, Iran kept playing India versus Pakistan. That is the point I was coming to. Throughout 1970s, 1980s, 1990s, and even in recent times, Iran has been constantly switching and fluctuating between India and Pakistan. Every now and then, Iran has poked India. It has triggered India on our internal matters. For example, if you look at the Shah's regime from 1950s to 1979, the Shah was clearly pro-Pakistan given that both were American allies. During Cold War, Pakistan had aligned with the United States. And the Shah's regime in Iran was clearly pro-US. So Iran-Pakistan were quite close to each other during this period, and Iran supported Pakistan against India even over the Kashmir issue, which was a sensitive matter to India. So there is a history of Iran taking such positions against India and crossing India's red lines. And after the Iranian Revolution, after a Shia theocracy was established, Iran tried to bring some balance into this relationship between India and Pakistan. The supreme leader, who's a religious figurehead, the Ayatollah, has often made contradictory statements with regard to Iran's relations with India and Pakistan, with regard to Iran's position on Kashmir and the alleged plight of Indian Muslims. If you look at the period of 1980s, when Iran had aligned with Pakistan again, and India had to support Iraq during the Iran-Iraq war, we were on the opposite sides again. So the Ayatollah made few controversial statements about Kashmir. But parallelly, attempts were also made to balance India-Pakistan as well. For example, in 1990, the Ayatollah spoke about the harsh treatment allegedly meted out by the Indian government, which led to human rights violations in Kashmir. These statements were rejected by India. But at the same time, there were instances where Iran supported India as well, and I'll come to that point in a little while. In a few years later, the Ayatollah, the supreme leader, again made a controversial statement on Kashmir, alleging that India was violating human rights of the Kashmiri people. It backed Pakistan on several occasions, even at global platforms like Organization of Islamic Cooperation and United Nations, especially when Pakistan tried to internationalize the Kashmir conflict, tried to blame India for violating human rights in Kashmir. Sometimes Iran backed Pakistan's position. But as I said, there were instances where Iran tried to balance this by siding with India as well. There were instances where Iran helped India. For example, Pakistan, with the support of other countries, had brought up a resolution against India at OIC, Organization of Islamic Cooperation, and also at the UN Human Rights Council, accusing India of committing human rights violations in Kashmir. But during this resolution, it was Iran which supported India. The then Iranian president helped India defeat this resolution backed by Pakistan and its allies. There were instances where Iran took a more balanced position and pointed out that the conflict in Kashmir was largely a result of colonial exploitative policies, and it had led India-Pakistan to suffer and the people of Kashmir to suffer. This appeared to be a more moderate statement. In the recent years itself, in the last 2 decades, the Ayatollah and Iranian government, they have toned down the rhetoric against India, and they have been more balanced as well during certain instances. So essentially, Iran follows a policy of ambiguity. It contradicts itself every now and then. Sometimes it says Pakistan is right, it supports Kashmir, the Pakistan on the Kashmir issue, takes a stand against India. It accuses India of committing human rights violations and committing violations of minority rights. But at the same time, it comes out with a contradictory position, supporting India, balancing the relationship with India. Now the question is, why does Iran do this? Why does Iran have such a complex position on India-Pakistan? Why does Iran meddle with India sometimes on Kashmir issue and on the issue of Indian Muslims? And sometimes it appears to reach out to India and have friendly relations with India. What explains this policy of ambiguity? Let's understand this quickly. Iran has realized the benefits of balancing India and Pakistan with this contradictory position. See, in geopolitics, every country is bothered about their self-interests. More than ideals and principles, right? Every country is driven by their self-interest, their geopolitical interests. Sometimes Iran will play the Kashmir card. Sometimes it will play the minority card, the Muslim card as well. Why? Sometimes if Iran wants to keep pressure on India, to keep India away from United States, as India-US relations have become extremely close in the last 2 decades, Iran would try to bring pressure on India to stay away from US, to not follow American sanctions by playing the Kashmir card, by supporting Pakistan, by making statements on Kashmir, by accusing India of human rights violations, and by commenting on the plight of Indian Muslims. At the same time, it would use the same Kashmir card to pressurize Pakistan, to keep Pakistan away from Saudi Arabia. If Pakistan was posing a threat to Iranian interests, to Shia interests, Iran would use this card to support India and not back Pakistan, so that it could pressurize Pakistan to keep Pakistan away from Saudi Arabia, which is a rival of Iran. And also, don't forget, Iran projects itself not just as a leader of the Shia world, but it projects itself as a leader of the entire Muslim world. So this has to do with Iran's internal politics and global image. The Shia theocracy wants to show to its people that, look, we care about Muslims everywhere in the world, be it in Gaza, be it in African countries, in West Asia, in Myanmar, in Afghanistan, in Kashmir, wherever Muslims are suffering, we support them, we stand with them. By showing this position, it tries to create support within Iran, within its internal constituency, that enables the legitimacy of the theocratic regime in Iran. And it projects itself as a leader of the Muslim world to create a global image as a leading power among the Muslim countries. This allows Iran to counter its rivals within the Islamic world like Saudi Arabia, Turkey and others. So there are complex factors at play that you need to understand. It's not just that Iran has enmity with India. No, India, Iran are not enemies. But we do have a complex relationship. There have been points of friction. There have been challenges. The reason is Iran plays this issue to suit its interests. When India gets closer to US, it will take a position against India, support Pakistan on Kashmir, make comments on the plight of Indian Muslims. Why? It seeks to put pressure on India to keep India away from US, to ensure India doesn't follow American sanctions. It will use the same card by supporting India instead of Pakistan to pressurize Pakistan not to align entirely with Saudi Arabia. And it also uses this issue to project itself as a leader of the Muslim world, as a country that cares about the plight of Muslims around the world, and it tries to create support within its internal constituency, and it tries to create a global image for itself. These are the reasons why Iran tends to do this. But now, in recent years, Iran has done this repeatedly. For example, a few years ago, when the Citizenship Amendment Act was brought out by the Modi government and it triggered a controversy leading to anti-CAA protests. There were massive riots in Delhi. I'm sure many of you recollect this incident. During the Delhi riots, many countries in the Islamic world criticized India for the way in which the situation was handled. Many countries condemned the CAA as well, and Iran was one of them. Iran criticized India. It demanded that India should protect the Muslim community and the religious minorities under threat, under the threats posed by the religious extremists from the majority community in India. So these statements were very controversial coming from Iran and other countries, and India clearly rejected these statements. India called this as an interference in our internal matters. Now we are seeing the same again. So yesterday when Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah tweeted and compared the plight of Muslims in India with that of Myanmar and Gaza, the intention was pretty much the same, to whip up these issues and to project Iran as a leader of the Muslim world. Or there could be some deeper underlying issues as well, which we are going to explore before we end this discussion. But the question is, how does this position of Iran affect India? What is its impact? Does it really pose a threat? Does it really threaten our claims on Kashmir? Does it really threaten India's security? Right? That is what we need to assess. Most experts agree that this Iranian position of ambiguity is more of an irritant for India. It's something that crosses our red lines. It's something that bothers India, affects India. But it is not a threat for India, because we know very well that the Iranian position on Kashmir, or be it on the internal situation in our country, doesn't really have any ground level impact. There is no ground level support that Iran can whip up against India, and there are no direct implications as such for India, be it geopolitically or be it from a security perspective, right? So more than a threat, Iran's position on India's internal issues is an irritant for India, because it leads to interference in our internal matters. It questions our sovereignty, it questions our claims on Kashmir. Unnecessarily, it instigates India's internal issues, right? And despite India being a secular democracy, Iran making such statements could create problems for India's image at the global level. At platforms like OIC and UN, we might face challenges when other countries align with Iran and Pakistan to jointly target India. But other than that, there is no direct perceived threat from this Iranian position. Is that clear? Now let's see, what kind of support does India have in the Muslim world? What challenges do we have with some major Islamic powers? This is an integral part of our West Asian policy. If you look at Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, which are seen as leaders of the Sunni world, before 2010, these countries were largely pro-Pakistan. They didn't have very close relations with India. India was largely dependent on them for oil supplies and for ensuring the well-being of the Indian community. But after 2010, Saudi, UAE and other Sunni powers have become strategic partners to India because of improved India-US relations, as most Sunni powers are close allies of United States. After Manmohan Singh visited Saudi Arabia in 2010, signed the Riyadh Declaration, Saudi and UAE both have become strategic partners in the field of security, counter-terrorism. We have built very strong economic relations. It's not just about oil trade anymore. Today, these powers are investing in India. We have free trade agreement with UAE. Indian community, Indian migrant workers play a critical role in their economy. So in every aspect, Saudi, UAE and other Sunni powers have become strategic partners to India, and they are taking a more balanced position, even going to the extent of supporting India. For example, when there are terror attacks against India coming from Pakistan, UAE, Saudi Arabia have supported India and criticized Pakistan for sponsoring terrorism. For example, if you look at Uri attacks, Pulwama attacks, recently Saudi, UAE supported India, they sympathized with India. When India retaliated with surgical strikes and airstrikes, they supported India's right to defend itself against terrorism. Now this was a significant shift coming from the Islamic world. So our relations with the Sunni powers, especially Saudi and UAE, is fantastic in the last few years. On the other extreme end, we have the problematic countries, of course Pakistan to start with, and there are few new countries which are backing Pakistan, Turkey and Malaysia. These countries have been creating trouble for India by meddling with India's internal issues like Kashmir during anti-CAA protests and the alleged persecution of Indian Muslims. So Pakistan would like to meddle with India's internal matters. It brings up these issues at OIC and United Nations, where it enjoys significant influence. Especially at Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Pakistan does enjoy some support, and powers like Turkey and even Malaysia, because of their own internal politics, they have chosen to take a stand against India. Malaysia has tried to project itself as a leader of the Muslim world. The government, the political parties in Malaysia have tried cornering votes by appealing to conservative elements, religious elements. In Turkey as well, the leader, the Turkish president, Recep Erdogan, has turned Turkey away from secularism, pushed Turkey on the more conservative path, and he wishes to see Turkey as a leader of the Muslim world as well, right? And this leads Turkey to side with Pakistan against India, even though we were very friendly before Turkey turned against India. So we are facing problems with these countries where they often take a position on India, and this affects our global image. So Iran, I would place it in between the two. Saudi, UAE are very friendly and strategic partners today, even going to the extent of supporting India and balancing their ties with Pakistan. Pakistan, Turkey, Malaysia are on the other extreme end, always targeting India, right? Of late, things have improved with Malaysia, by the way. India, Malaysia have reached out to each other and relations have slightly improved. But Turkey continues to back Pakistan. So they are on the other extreme end. I would place Iran in between these two extremes. Iran has a more ambiguous position, a more balanced position designed to suit its own interests. Sometimes it will support Pakistan, sometimes it will support India. It will deliberately make statements against India and its internal issues. So I think this explains the statements made by the Supreme Leader. But the big question is, why is it coming now? There should be some trigger, some possible context in which the statement was made by the Ayatollah. So let's explore the possibilities. One possibility could be Iran, which is facing a credibility crisis, could be trying to whip up support domestically to keep Iran united. Because recently, Iran's sovereignty has been compromised by Israel in the ongoing Gaza war. Israel has retaliated against Iran, conducted strikes in Iran as well, and it even assassinated the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, when he was in Tehran. The death of Iranian President Ibrahim el-Raisi under controversial circumstances, allegedly involving Israel. There is a conspiracy theory surrounding the death of the Iranian president that occurred due to a helicopter crash. And when the new Iranian president was being sworn in, Israel retaliated by conducting a strike, by eliminating the leader of Hamas, who was invited by Iran. These have been significant blows to Iran and the legitimacy of the theocracy. So maybe the Ayatollah is trying to build up Iran's image, to strengthen the internal constituency, the support base for the radical Shia theocracy, trying to rebuild Iran's image as a leader of the Muslim world. So that could be a reason, right? That could have pushed the Supreme Leader to equate the situation in Myanmar and Gaza with that of Indian Muslims, which is completely unfair. So Iran could be attempting again to project itself as a leader of the Muslim world, trying to rebuild its internal constituency, trying to cement its position. Also, there could be another angle to this. If you look at this from the prism of the Gaza war, India has taken a balanced position on the Gaza conflict. We have supported the Palestinian cause. We always back the two-state solution, the right of Palestinians to have their own country. We even condemn the brutal, disproportionate use of force by Israel. We have even voted against Israel when large-scale human rights violations have occurred. But at the same time, we have strategic relations with Israel and United States. We have become very close military partners, and the strategic relationship between India, Israel, India, US is something that obviously bothers Iran. Not just Iran, even Russia, China, they form an axis that oppose close relations between India, US and Israel. So there could be a larger geopolitical game which is at play. Also, there are allegations that recently Indian defense companies have exported armaments and weapons to Israel. In the ongoing Gaza war, Indian-made armaments have been discovered in Gaza, leading to controversies, leading to allegations that India is supplying arms and weapons to Israel and enabling the humanitarian tragedy against Palestinians. So any of these reasons could have been a possible trigger for Iran to make this statement against India. But now, this is where I think Iran should draw a lesson from India. Even India has had many triggers in the past. If we wanted, we could have targeted Iran as well, made comments against Iran. But India has shown tremendous restraint out of respect to Iran's core concerns. See, we may have fallen under American pressure. India did cut off oil imports from Iran, and we did follow the American sanctions on Iran. This might be seen as a strategic blunder by India that affected our ties with Iran. But other than that, India has always shown restraint with Iran, and we have shown a genuine interest to protect the strategic friendly partnership. See, as I told you, to be fair to the Modi government, there was a valid practical reason, a pragmatic reason why India had to follow American sanctions. Because if we hadn't followed American sanctions, Indian oil companies trading with Iran would be hit and affected by the American sanctions. So it only made pragmatic sense, geopolitical sense for India to cut off oil imports. We never had anything personal with Iran. In fact, we have stood with Iran many times. We have condemned American sanctions in the past, bypassed American sanctions. But other than this, there has been no other mistake as such done by India. If you look at the internal problems in Iran, right? That's why India has said that Iran should look at its own internal problems. It should hold a mirror to itself before commenting about India. 2 years ago, Iran faced massive protests. The radical, conservative, fundamentalist regime was hit by massive protests led primarily by Iranian women. Because in Iran, under the controversial Sharia which is imposed, gender rights, women rights are often targeted. Women are strictly forced to follow a dress code, and even a slight violation of the rigid dress code leads to strict action by the moral police. Iran has a so-called morality police that enforces the dress code and the Sharia. So one woman, Mahsa Amini, an Iranian Kurd, was picked up by the moral police for a minor violation of the dress code, and eventually she was found dead in custody following alleged reports of severe custodial torture. This brutal death of Mahsa Amini triggered a massive protest where Iranian women and even the more liberal elements in Iran, they all rose up in protest against the radical Shia regime. Around the world, wherever Iranian refugees have sought asylum, they all took out protests and marches against Iran calling for regime change. So during this situation, Western countries were criticizing Iran, they were targeting Iran, but India remained neutral. India said it's an internal issue of Iran, we have no comments. If we wanted, we could have made a comment. It was definitely a violation of human rights, a case of human right violation. India could have taken a stand supporting the protests like others did, but we did not do that. India showed restraint, we showed respect for Iran's core issues, and we said this is an internal matter of Iran, let them deal with it, and India did not make any adverse comments. That shows the neutral position of India and the tacit support we have given to Iran. Even during the Gaza war and over the Palestinian question, India has carefully struck a balance between Israel and Palestine, between US and Iran. For example, till date, we have never recognized Hamas as a terrorist organization. Officially, India has never labeled Hamas as a terrorist outfit. We have never commented about Iran's covert links with Hamas and other extremist groups like Hezbollah and even the Houthis. Even though Houthi attacks in Red Sea was affecting Indian economic interests, the attacks were happening in Arabian Sea as well. Few Indian ships were targeted as well. Despite that, we never made a comment about Iran's covert sponsorship of Hamas, the Houthis and Hezbollah. India has taken a balanced position on the conflict. Though we condemned the attack, the terrorist attack on October 7th and stood with Israel and its right to fight against terrorism, we have condemned Israel as well against its disproportionate use of force in Gaza. We have voted against Israel in support of Palestine, and we have called for two-state solution, for Palestine to be created as a separate state. This shows our balanced position on the Israel-Palestine question, and even during the Gaza war, India has remained very balanced. And yet, Iran chose to meddle with India and make these comments about India. During the recent Iran-Israel clashes, when Israel had killed few Iranian officials, right, and Iran retaliated, leading to major escalation, India remained neutral. Despite the close relations with Israel, we protected our ties with Iran as well by taking a balanced position. We didn't blame anyone. We urged both of them to tone down the tensions and negotiate. During the recent Iran-Pakistan clashes in the Baloch region, Iran conducted military strikes in the Baloch region of Pakistan against a few terror groups that target Iran, which hide in the Baloch region, allegedly with support from Pakistani state agencies. So when Iran targeted them and later Pakistan retaliated as well against the Baloch groups which hide in Iran, India stood with Iran and supported Iran as it supported our stand that Pakistan is a host of terror groups. It creates a safe haven for terrorist organizations. And we stood with Iran and we supported Iran during its clashes with Pakistan as well. So this is how India has always supported Iran. We have understood its red lines and core concerns, and we have shown restraint despite a lot of triggers being present. If we wanted, even we could have criticized Iran. We could have condemned Iran's support to Hamas and the Houthis. We could have condemned Iran's role in destabilizing West Asia, or we could have condemned Iran's violation of human rights and gender rights within the country. But we have never done that. So this should have been a lesson for Iran, but it has made this controversial statement pointing towards the alleged plight of Indian Muslims. So again, as I said, there might be concerns about religious polarization, communal divide, but that is nothing new to India. But the fact remains that India is a functional constitutional democracy with an independent judiciary, a free press, and the rights of every community, every citizen is well protected. And compared to Iran, India remains a thriving democracy. So Iran is in no position to make this statement, and correctly, India's foreign ministry has rejected the comments, called them deplorable. India has said Iran is misinformed. Those comments are unacceptable. And more importantly, we have pointed out that Iran should look at itself in the mirror before making such observations. It's a clear pointer towards Iran's own human rights record, how it has treated minorities, religious minorities, gender minorities. And India is asking Iran to look at itself before commenting about others. So this strong reply by India does create friction in the relationship. As I said, Iran's statements may not pose a direct threat to us, but it does create friction. It does become an irritant in the relationship because Iran has crossed a red line for India. So let's see how things will develop in the coming days. We will continue to track this important story as it defines India-Iran relations and our interests across the West Asia, South Asia region. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the session, understood all the key points that we have discussed, and if you did benefit, support us with your likes and comments. That is it from my side. Thanks for watching. Have a good day.